Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it is you are tuning in from. My name is Garrett. I am the host of this series inspired by, brought to you by Light Panels. Big ups to Light Panels for putting this on. If you are familiar with any of the series that we have done thus far, this one's a little different than the ones we've done in the past because I'm not the one producing this content. Instead, I'm bringing you cool cinematographers from all different backgrounds that are each taking on a different filmmaker, cinematographer, movie, or show that they are inspired by to then create content from. We've got people from all over the world in here. If you guys are in the chat, throw in where you're saying hi from. I always love seeing where people tune in from. Got Munich Journey. Eric, always good to see you. So today we are looking at the bear, but before we do, as always, our next live stream is scheduled. That is going to happen on July 16th. If you follow the link that the Light Panels folks will put here in the chat, you can then register for that. As always, registration is free, but that's just so we can send you the invites and continue this series forward. Make sure you're following Light Panels on all social media and subscribe to their YouTube channel because that is where you will be able to see these live streams and all of the past live streams we have done. So if you have missed any of the live streams in this series up to this point, whether it's this series or the 4 previous series that we have done, you can catch up and learn there. It's a great resource. Also, feel free to follow me on my social, subscribe to my YouTube as well. Everything that I do is educational filmmaking content. Without further ado, let me introduce you to today's filmmaker. I'd like to introduce you to a dear friend of mine. His name is Sam Grima. He is a cinematographer for the production company called Cinesnack. He is the one who took on this challenge of filming in the style of the bear. Sam, great to see you, buddy.
How's it going, Garrett? Thanks for having me.
I am so glad you're here. We've got people from all over. I see that we've got Glasgow, we've got Albuquerque, we've got Portugal, we've got Boulder, Colorado, New York, Nashville, LA, UK. We got people from all over the place. Can everybody hear me all right? I see Michael's having some issue with the audio. I want to make sure everybody can hear me okay. Marvelous. Eric can hear me. Eric, the OG of this thing. I think he's been on every one for several years now. It's always good to have you. Now, before we can dive into how Sam shot these scenes from the bear, I think it's first most important we watch those scenes. So before we continue, let's dive in and look at the scenes that Sam created inspired by the bear.
Reminder chefs, new month, new menu. That means we're 86 rosemary chicken. We're on to curry butter.
Yes, chef.
With the soup, no more squash. It's going to be cherry tomato.
Yes,
and
chef.
there is Lombardi. We're 40 out.
Great question, chef.
Bardi, no call, no show.
I haven't called his auntie. You call. You would.
Busso.
Yes, chef.
Can I get asparagus and rolled basil for prep?
That's almost done. Mashed potatoes first.
Lombardi mentioned to close the ticket's busted.
The ticker, of course. That's the last thing I've had time for.
Well, this is the first I'm hearing of it. Sauce check. Behind. Burnt. Chef, check your temperature. It's way too high. I don't know if we even have time to fire new stock before service, but go now. Rock me, what's our inventory of stock?
Busso. ETA, ETA, ETA.
I'm on it. You're done in 3. Oh, hey, sorry, guys. Did I miss anything? What? Never seen a man in a uniform before?
Wow, food looks amazing.
What is that? Pomegranates?
Hey yo, this gravy looks great. You remember Scorch It How I Like It?
Come on, you gotta let that go, man.
What's the gravy?
Stop busting my gravy boat, dog.
Caldera brought down the back of the house. Infamous.
Listen, we got there in the end, and that's all that matters, all right?
Thank you, thanks. Hey, is Francis coming tonight?
No, Francis isn't.
Because of? Oh,
Yeah, the thing. Anyways, who wants to say grace?
Francis is awful anyways,
Francis
so...
is not awful.
Okay, sorry. That's not what I meant. What I meant is the devil must be great company.
You're sure stirring a big pot for somebody that can't even soft boil an egg.
Oh, ouch. Bite harder.
Why don't you enjoy water tonight, because you didn't even help us with any of this.
Oh no, I'm missing out on the roast of a lifetime with the big-time chef.
Listen, it wouldn't even be worth it. It would be wasted in your rotten mouth.
Jesus. Simmer down now.
Can someone just say grace, please?
I could say grace.
No. We can take this outside, you and me.
You're truly not worth the hassle. John, please say grace.
Well, that went better than expected.
Yeah, I mean, David just thinks he's funnier than he actually is.
I don't know, maybe I can't keep up with you guys.
Are you kidding? Mistakes? That's a guaranteed. I mean, you can't get good unless you go real slow for a long time, and we just can't do that every day. You know, you gotta learn slow, be precise, and then you optimize. I mean, you can't just jump straight to perfect and fast.
How long did it take you?
13 years, but you know, for the first 5, I thought I was a lot better than I was, or at least that's what I wanted other people to think. You know, I mean, I could have gotten there a lot faster if I had just taken it slow. You know, be slow, be intentional, and don't be afraid to let other people see you mess up. I mean, some people like it when you can just set your ego aside and be a happy learner.
Okay, wow. 3 very different scenes, all very much in line with the look, feel, and style of the bear. So, Sam, before we get into the specifics of each scene here, do you want to just talk a little bit about your approach? Oh, by the way, everyone, the Q&A module, if you're unfamiliar with this is the best way for us to be able to see questions that you have. We will try our best to have a Q&A at the end of the session, but should we not have time, I recommend that as you have questions, as we get into this, fire those into the little Q&A module you'll see at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure we do our best to get all of your questions. Okay, Sam, before we get into the specifics here, you want to talk about your general approach when examining the lighting style of the bear and how you went about the lighting approach.
Yeah. So when we were trying to come up with an idea of what to shoot for this project, we kind of took a look at some of the projects we've shot, and we wanted something with a lot of variety, a lot of mixed lighting, and a lot of chaotic camera work, something that would really challenge us. So we thought about one of the most stressful shows, which was The Bear, and just how we could replicate that the best we could. So we picked the one scene that most people are probably most familiar with, which is stuff in the kitchen and the really kind of harsh green mixed lighting. And then we also wanted 2 other scenes that looked very different from that. So we picked the 2 scenes, one from season 2, I believe episode 6, the Christmas dinner, which had this really soft, warm feel to it, which was very different from the rest of the show. And then the 3rd scene, I believe, was from season 1, and it's just a conversation between Carm and his cousin outside of the restaurant, which also had a very cool, contrasty feel compared to, again, the rest of the show.
Love it. Now, if you guys haven't seen The Bear, highly recommend the show. Chaotic and stressful is a good way to describe the way that show feels. So, Sam, as we get into this first scene here, one of the themes that we keep talking about in this series is the idea of lighting spaces and not faces, which when you're shooting a show like The Bear, where you're moving through these spaces a lot, right? Dynamic camera movements, but kind of shooting through the entire space. One of the things I want to make sure we talk about is how we set up the lights and back the lights up to get the look that we want, but still have the freedom to move throughout a sequence. So let's first dive into the kitchen scene here. Do you want to break this down? How did you film this scene?
Yeah. So with the kitchen scene, we had a lot of moving parts, a lot of actors, and a bit of dialogue to cover. So we had to move quick, and we only had, I think, like 4 hours to shoot there. So we were shooting on the FX3 utilizing the DZO Vespid primes. The show is shot on the ARRILX LF, I believe, or the MIDI LF. So we wanted to replicate that large format look, and the full frame sensor on the FX3 was able to give us that look. And another thing that we found out through a bit of research was that during the kitchen scenes, they have an exposed set. All of the lighting in there is meant for camera work to be very fluid. Lights aren't in the way, or they're disguised as practicals. That way the camera crew can move around freely, and the actors can move around freely as well to get whatever shots they need in as little time as possible. So that was something we wanted to try and replicate when we were creating the scene. So utilizing the double rainbow tubes from Quasar, we were able to hang those into the ceiling with drop ceiling scissor clamps. And those kind of disguised themselves as ceiling tube lights. We also utilized a lot of scoop lights, both tungsten and daylight balanced, that served as kind of those warm villain characters during the scene. And they also blend in very well with the kitchen. We also had a 1x1 Gemini panel that we were able to freely move around to kind of fill in as a background fill for window light or fluorescent lighting.
How do you ensure that you're exposing, your white balance is right, that your skin tones look good? How are you dialing everything in to make sure it looks the way you want it to look?
It's a great question. So we wanted a higher contrast ratio, and so we generally expose for skin tones, and then we would check our false colors throughout the day to make sure that none of our lights were peaking. And we would just adjust the lights on the go from there. But primarily exposing for skin tones was our biggest thing.
So we got a question in here. I apologize if I say your name incorrectly. Dagoberto says, mixed lighting was the question. Are you shooting in RAW so you can recolor later? What's your post-grading workflow?
So the FX3 without the Atomos Ninja does not record RAW. So we were recording, I believe it was Sony's codec 𝗣𝗂𝐶𝑆-I. It's an H.264 codec in all intra. It's the highest bit rate that the camera is able to capture internally. And that gave us a bit more flexibility with color grading in post. But we also, not shooting in RAW, kind of had to lock in the look. And, you know, once we shot that mixed lighting, that's kind of what we were getting. So we had to ensure that that's the look we really wanted. We did a couple of tests beforehand to make sure it was the general look we wanted.
So that brings up an interesting point that I don't think we talk enough about, especially at like the indie level, the solo owner operator level, when people are first getting started. Before we kind of start to move on here, let's talk a little bit about the value of having tech walkthrough days or lighting test days or camera test days. Why does that matter to a workflow, especially when you're doing something super high contrast, super saturated in a mixed lighting setting?
So it definitely relieves a lot of the stress because beforehand you're able to work out the exact look you're going for. It gives you the time to experiment, see what does and doesn't work, especially if you get on location before the actual shoot. It's something we've started incorporating into a lot of our sets, and it just really helps us during the pre-pro process and locking in the general look we're going for. It gives us practice to see if there's new things we want to try potentially, and it just really helps us out during the day because then we've already been on location. We know what we're going for. We've practiced beforehand, and it helps the actual execution of the shoot go by much smoother.
100%. 100%. Okay, so let's take a look at this lighting plot here. Walk me through where you had everything set up, why you had it set up that way, and what setting that light up that way did for the production.
Yep. So we had the quasar tubes over the tables in the kitchen to kind of fill in the space and give the general tone throughout. And so those spread throughout the whole set. We then set up the scoop lights at each station in which a character was standing. This kind of acted as that warm fill that kept characters exposed pretty well throughout. And then we also had the 1x1 Gemini panels that we were moving around throughout the set to kind of add in a fill when we felt appropriate. We also had one set in the back corner of the set to emulate daylight, spilling into the kitchen from a fake window, essentially. And then also when our character, Aaron, went into the freezer of the kitchen, we were able to utilize it was the quasar 2-foot double rainbow. We brought that into the freezer, and it was powered on a V-mount. It was super lightweight and flexible, and we were able to just put it in the freezer super quick, get that lighting set up. We got the shot, and then we were able to tear it down in like less than 10 minutes.
So that's the first scene. Again, if you guys have questions about that first scene, please feel free to use that Q&A module. We'll come back to this at the end. Let's move on to our second scene here, which looked a little different because this was the dining scene. Do you want to walk us through that?
Yeah, so the dining room scene, we were in a bit of a tight space, and we had, I believe it was 5 or 6 characters sitting at this dining table, and we wanted it, well, we again wanted like the freedom to shoot across the table and see each character without having to move lights. So our gaffer, Griffin, had a menace arm, and we were able to use a 4x4 floppy with black cloth attached to the sides to kind of help control the light. And we had the 1x1 Gemini shooting through that, which gave us our general lighting for the scene. From there, we added a lot of practicals, primarily string lights throughout, and a lot of candlelight on the dinner table. So that, again, it kind of felt like an exposed set. We had a lot of flexibility to move around and move our camera setup without having the need to move lights around.
So let's talk a little bit about the value of shooting LED in tight spaces, right? Because that 1x1 hard is pushing a ton of light.
Yeah.
So what's the value in using a panel light like that with a ceiling that's as low as the ceiling we were in?
So the really nice thing about the 1x1 hard is how small and thin it is. Because of its size, we were able to launch it up pretty close to the ceiling and still have a lot of height between our characters and the light, which really gave us a lot of flexibility when shooting. It also, obviously, LED lights don't get as hot as tungsten lights do. And when you have a lot of bodies in the room, the last thing you want is the room to get a lot hotter.
How did we use the lights? Where were they set up? I mean, we obviously have the big overhead, but that wouldn't have been the only one. So walk me through this.
Yes. Yeah. So as I stated, we had the 4x4 silk with the hard light bouncing through. That was our key light. And then we had all of the string lights throughout the entire dining area, as well as in the background of the living room. We also had a tabletop lamp set as a practical at 3200 Kelvin. That just kind of added some general ambiance into the background. And then we also had the 1x1 Gemini as well, that we kind of moved around as a bit of a rim light for each character, and that was set at 3800 Kelvin.
Now, the choice that you had here to use all of these holiday string lights, obviously the set deck and everything was set at Christmas kind of holiday time. Was the holiday setup an excuse to use the string lights, or like explain the reason for the string lights as a background element.
Mm-hmm. So in the actual scene in the bear, the dinner scene takes place during Christmas. And so they had utilized these string lights, I'm sure, as an excuse to be just a good background practical. It looks really good, especially on a telephoto lens, getting all that crisp bokeh. So we saw that as a really great opportunity to just copy them. So we also tried to set deck a bit like Christmas, and that gave us a really great excuse to use said string lights that just really filled in the background of the scene and gave that really soft, warm feel throughout.
Nice. Now, one of the things when I was starting out, and I'm sure that there's folks on the live stream that feel the same way, when it comes to first learning how to reverse engineer lighting, right? Like, how do we look at a show like The Bear, be like, I want to shoot like that, and then be able to successfully do it? Can you talk me through the creative process? How do you look at a shot or a scene and examine that scene? What do you take away from that? And then how do you use that to inform how you do it in your own production?
Oh, man. So that is a great question. The way I kind of got to that point was just over years of practicing different lighting setups and doing things like studying YouTube videos on things like Roger Deakins cinematography or Hoyt Van Hoytema's cinematography, finding out lighting techniques that they really like to use, and then comparing that to the movies or the TV shows that they actually shot, and trying to find and analyze different lighting setups that they had done, and then trying to replicate and emulate those myself. I would say it's kind of how I got to that point. Just a lot of time watching stuff and experimenting on my own, even if it was just like little tabletop stuff, or bringing in a model and trying different lighting setups for lighting skin tones and general exposure and such.
I think that's an interesting point of experimenting, right? Playing with an idea until you get it to look the way that you want it to. I think most people watching the stream, myself included, every time we get done with a project, you examine what you did and analyze what you would do differently, like how you would approach it differently, what you would do to improve upon that. And instead of just doing that on client work or on final production work, taking the time to watch things, analyze how those things are done, whether you're able to find behind the scenes stuff on it or not, just looking at projects, reverse engineering them and practicing them. If you like the way something looks, go out and shoot it. Try to get as close as you can. And in the same way that spec work is so good for commercial work, doing the same thing creatively of just testing things to see how close you can get. So then that way you have that tool in the tool belt by the time you actually need that as a resource is a really cool thing. Okay, I got another question here. How often are you intentionally using shadows outside of the basic 3-point lighting? How often are these happy accidents happening during set? Sam, I'll forward the question to you in just a second here. We've talked about this in a couple of the past live streams. When it comes to traditional 3-point lighting, we use that primarily for interviews. So corporate, docu-style, talking heads. What's more important than 3-point lighting is what 3-point lighting does for you conceptually, not just having 3 fixtures. So if the purpose of a key light is to have a main source of light, utilizing things like windows, open doors, outside, even practicals on set, just something that gives us a sense for this is where the light's coming from. That's the purpose of a key. A fill, the only purpose that serves is to eliminate or remove unattractive or unwanted shadows. It's not to remove contrast. We want contrast, but we want contrast on our own terms. So especially if we're using a practical within a scene, right? Like a lamp or a table or a window, whatever, that light might not be giving us the light behaviorally that we want to have. So we can adjust, modify, or otherwise change the behavior of that light to get it to produce the type of light that we want. And then on the fill side, again, whether we're adding light in or pulling light away, it's just to get the contrast how we want it to look. And then the purpose, of course, of the backlight or hair light is just to separate your foreground elements from your background elements. You don't need 3 fixtures to utilize the purpose of 3-point lighting, but understanding what they do is important. You really, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but you really don't want to lean on happy accidents on a film set. You want to be as prepared as possible moving into a production, because things always happen on a shoot that you have to work through. And if we're just trying to fly by dumb luck to make it happen, we're going to be in for a bad time. Sam, that's kind of my approach to this. What are your thoughts?
No, 100%. I mean, that's why pre-pro. We always, before our shoots, like to do emulation in Cinetracer. We like to set up lighting and characters and get the general look that we're going for, and then we'll still actually go out onto location and test that out with whatever crew we can bring on. It cuts down on a lot of those happy accidents because we're really dialing in exactly every little minute detail we're going for in the lighting, in the look, in the cinematography, and the feel of the piece.
And it's not to say that happy accidents don't happen, right? Sometimes you end up on a shoot and it's like, oh, I see this thing that I didn't see before. Let's catch that. Or, oh, I really like the way that this is playing. But we don't want to lean on that, right? Generally, what happens on a film set is complications, things that make things harder, not necessarily things that make them easier. So the more you can plan, the more you can test, the more you can prep, the better you're going to do. Which actually leads into this next question here, which is how many pages did you shoot? And how many pages a day did you shoot, Sam?
I believe the total script was about 4 pages, which was pretty scary going into. We were really trying to keep it originally to about a page and a half. But just with the amount of dialogue we had to cover, it ended up being that long, and we only had 1 day to shoot it all. So again, having those exposed sets really gave us the flexibility to get through all of those pages in a single day. It was a lot of hard work, but we were able to bring on a lot of great people who really worked hard throughout the day. And because of that, we were able to capture all 4 pages.
I don't think people realize, especially if it's a single camera shoot, which this was a single camera shoot, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
I don't think people realize how long dialogue takes to actually shoot, because there's so many moving parts, right? Like we have talent that has to deliver correctly, the director that has to be able to convey what they want correctly, camera department has to be on point because we got to stay in focus. We have to have our movements, our framing, our composition, right? And then you have these extended monologues. So to get dialogue pages shot, even though the setups might not be that difficult, it does take a long time to get through. We did a previous series on this in one of the past live streams on how to shoot dialogue. And we created an entire 3-person scene with multiple dialogue and how you go about shooting that. You can find the lighting setup on Light Panel's YouTube channel. You can find the cinematography breakdown on my YouTube channel. But if you want to learn more a little bit about that, that's how you could go find that information. Sam, we got one more question here, which is, did you shoot live cam or multicam? I know we didn't here, but do you want to talk about the value of backing those lights off if you were to use a multicam setup?
Yeah, I mean, if we were to use a multicam setup, we would have definitely gotten through the dialogue scenes even quicker than we did. But the downside to that is the lighting wouldn't be consistent on each character. So utilizing a single cam, despite it taking longer, we were able to get the exact look we wanted for each and every shot.
Nice. One last question here before we move on here. Jason asks, how can I curve light to wrap around a subject? Believe it or not, Jason, you're in luck. The last live stream we did for this series, which is on Light Panel's YouTube channel, goes over exactly this. That episode was inspired by Roger Deakins, and one of the setups they did was talking about cove lighting, right, and how we can actually create light wrap. So if you want to take a look at that, that's on Light Panel's channel. There we go. There's a link in there. Thanks, Simon. So that would answer that question there. From just a quick breakdown style, and Sam, your process might be a little different than mine, but when it comes to light wrap, what's important is the surface area of the fixture that you're using, right? Generally, when we talk about light wrap, that's coming from the key side. What we want to make sure that we're doing is that the larger the surface area of that light is, obviously, the more wrap we're going to get from that. In addition to that, you can also play with angles. So instead of just having one plane as our key, we can actually add multiple planes to give us a little bit more refraction and reflection in those lights. So you can use things like bounce, you can use things like diffusion, you can use floppies, you can do whatever you want to kind of build that out. But the idea is instead of having a single plane, we kind of start adding multiple planes so that way the light is reflecting differently than if it was on a single plane. Do you have any other thoughts on wrapping key light, Sam?
No, I mean, you really nailed it on the head. Having a bigger source, whether it's a really large softbox or pulling out bleached muslin and stretching that out, that's generally what I like to go for. Sometimes just to control it a little bit, I like to throw egg crates or grids onto lights just to give it just a touch more control. But other than that.
So explain light control, because with a grid, we're not changing the behavior of the light. We're merely changing the focus of that light. So talk about the value of that.
Right. So without a grid going through something like a softbox, right, light is just spilling out. It's soft, it's large, it looks good. But sometimes it causes unwanted spill, whether it's on the background or a part of the subject we don't want. So putting a grid on said softbox will help control and beam the light more specifically, kind of eliminating a bit of that spill and thus controlling the light a little bit more.
And the nice thing with that is that it doesn't affect the behavior of light, right? It doesn't turn a soft light and make it a harsh light, right? It'll still be a soft light, but it's just going to direct a little bit. Digoberto says, I like using China balls for intimate setups. Yeah, China balls are also a really great way of, especially for like walk and talks, right? Where you need a mobile moving light, getting a soft non-directional source like that, which is good. I will throw a lantern on a 1x1 Gemini hard. It can be totally battery powered. So then I can just take a lollipop or some sort of extended light stand and I can do a walk and talk with full power, battery powered. And again, having that non-sourcey, non-directional key, which is really, really nice. One more question we got here. Do you move the lights as the actors move? Oh, hold on. That question disappeared on me. There we go. Do you move the lights as the actors move? If not, how do you set up the lights that will look good in all positions needed? Sam?
For this specific setup, we did move one light around a little bit. Our 1x1 Gemini, we would occasionally move it around just to get like a little bit of catch or rim on the back of a character. But generally, if we were to not do that, just really dialing in the look we wanted, we would have tested beforehand, and we would have copied the exact or from the scene. So having that top light really fill in those shadows and give that soft appearance on each of our characters would have been kind of the look.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, so yeah, you could use the mobile China ball, right, if you were going to be super mobile. But this is one of the things that goes back to a theme that we've talked about through all of these live streams. which is whatever your budget is, buy the brightest, most accurate lights your budget can afford. Anytime we modify a light, we're either going to be losing the spill of that light, right, which is going to be how much we have within a field of view, or we're going to be losing the intensity of that light. But you're losing something. And we want to be able to have a light that's bright enough that can hold up to any sort of modification that we want. So if you're not in a spot where you can pick up a Gemini 1x1 hard, you could pick up an Astra. It's still going to be very bright. It's still going to be very accurate, but not give you some of the RGB stuff that you can get with the Gemini lights, right? Same with the Quasar lines. They have a whole range of fixtures that you can go with. But whatever that budget is, make sure that you're buying the brightest lights you can that are as accurate as possible, because then however we want to modify them, we can. And to wrap up your question here, backing the lights up is what gives you a lot of the freedom that you're asking for. If we can back our lights away from our talent and still get the lighting that we want, we're then able to move more freely, whether it's with blocking in our talent, whether it is the way people are interacting with the set, whether it's just the camera department. But by backing all of that up, I don't then have to worry about as much moving lights from shot to shot, because the space is what's lit and not the face. And then we can modify a little bit as needed. But generally, that's the approach I take. Let's go into this third scene, which is one of my favorites. This third scene we had is that conversation outside the window at night. Walk us through this.
Yeah, so this was definitely the most fun to set up. Having this really goofy drive-through window sign came in really clutch for the scene. So in the actual show, two characters are speaking outside of the restaurant as a bachelor party is going on inside. And a lot of the light is motivated from nighttime, as well as background practicals in the restaurant and a neon sign lighting up the window. So what we did for this was we set up a couple of 4x4 floppies, and we threw one 1x1 with a DOP choice softbox and another 1x1 up behind the floppy. So that one of the lights was double tilt. It was then bouncing kind of our moonlight, quote unquote, onto our subjects. We also had the 2-foot quasar double rainbow, which we hung up above our subjects to kind of give more fill onto their faces and kind of keep some of the skin tones where we wanted them. And then the drive-through sign kind of acted as a background practical, adding a little bit of color. And we also had more of those holiday string lights in the background in the front living room of the home that added a little bit more bokeh in those tight singles for each of our characters.
So you brought up two things I want to talk about a little bit. One is the fact that we use these two 1x1s, again, on two different planes with two different kind of lighting hues on them as kind of some of that wrap light. Do you want to talk a little bit about the value of being able to dial in different colors with each of those panels?
Yeah, no, so those lights being RGBWW give us a lot of flexibility with being able to control what type of colors we want to select. So there were a lot of cooler tones, a lot of blues, a lot of purples, a bit of pinkish, and a little bit of red. So having the flexibility to pick those cooler tones without needing to use a gel just made us move a lot quicker. And we were able to kind of dial in very specific colors to get us really, really close to the look of the bear that we were trying to emulate.
One of the other things I noticed in that behind the scenes is a thing that we talk about a lot in this series of lighting bright and grading down, right? There's this misconception of when we're shooting in the dark, right, or at night or outside or whatever, that we should film in the dark, or my camera has 19 million ISO or whatever, right? And we don't take the time to light. But if you pay attention to the behind the scenes there, you guys were lit quite bright, even though the final deliverable was much darker. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, definitely. So in the actual scene from the bear, you can see that the blacks almost fall off completely. They almost get crushed. And we wanted to be able to replicate that, but we didn't want to underexpose our image either, because that could introduce unnecessary noise and kind of remove a little bit of our flexibility in post. So what we did was we just checked our false colors a lot, and we got our exposure pretty close to what we wanted to. We were exposed properly, so nothing was peaking in either our shadows and blacks or our highlights and our whites. And from there, in our color grade, we were able to bring those levels down to, it was about like a 16:1 contrast ratio. So again, like our blacks and shadows weren't quite crushed, but we were able to bring them down really, really low, creating that really dark image.
And this is where the value of lighting something correctly comes in, right? You're not shooting in RAW. You're not shooting with a camera that has 16 stops of dynamic range, but you're still able to achieve the final look that you're going for. We've talked about it a little bit before. We'll recap again. Watch past episodes. We go over a lot of this foundational stuff there. There's two things that audiences are looking for. The first thing audiences are looking for are eyeballs. The second thing audiences are looking for is skin tone. If we expose properly for eyes and faces, and we make sure that whatever the camera settings are that we need to use we use, but we capture this right, the rest of the image is far more forgivable. But if we are in a space shooting in the dark and we shoot 2 stops under because that's the way we want the final image to look, we're not going to have the control that we want in post to actually tune that look the way that we want. The less you have to worry about image correction, the more you can focus on color grading, and color grading as a narrative tool. Okay, couple questions here. Sergio asks, Sam, how do you keep your balance with the look that you want to get the scene, but also make sure that it looks realistic, so it looks like an actual place people would be hanging out in? It's easy to go overboard when the lights are so capable, RGB, etc.
Yeah, so the biggest thing I think that helps with that is making sure that our skin tones stay pretty accurate. So having a fill light, like that's daylight balanced, to help keep skin tones looking natural. And then from there, filling in and adding color to kind of spice up the scene and get it closer to that look we're going for. It kind of helps things feel more real, but also kind of goes towards that look we're trying to capture.
One of the things, specifically on the Gemini lights, but one of the things that's also important to pay attention to is the intensity of the color, especially when we're talking about RGB, and how that's affecting our individual channels. So on your monitors, you'll be able to see waveform, you'll be able to see waveform parade, you'll be able to see vector scopes, you'll be able to look at the colors. And when you're looking at a waveform parade, what it's doing is it's separating the green, red, and blue channels. Blue is the first saturation that's going to be overexposed or crunch out. So when we talk about exposure, it's not just luminance, which is our brightness, it's also our saturation. So when you're using a quasar or a Gemini and you're dialing in a color, as you're dialing that color in, if you're in HSI mode, which is hue, saturation, intensity, you can then increase or decrease that saturation level of the color that you want. So as you're monitoring that image in camera, be sure you're paying attention not just to false color, right, or the intensity of your illuminance, but also looking at the saturation of each color channel, because blue will pop first, then red, then green. And you can really mess up the image if you blow out the saturation in any given channel. In the same way that if something's overexposed, we can't pull the highlights down, right? The highlight recovery gets messed up. Or if we're too underexposed, you can't take the shadow and pull that back up. The same is true with our color saturation. If we're blown out in the blue channel, no amount of pulling that blue down in post is going to bring back that detail because that color channel is lost. So as you're going through and mixing white light or warm white light with RGBs, it's important to make sure that you're paying attention to saturation in addition to luminance. Next question we have here. How do you make how do you make the colored lights dominate the scene while using regular lights paired with them? So this is similar to the first question, but a little bit more specific. Sam?
Yeah, just being able to know how you're shaping the light and like controlling where you want certain light to go. So obviously we had our colored light kind of blasting onto our talent, but because of those quasar tubes, we were able to blast brighter light closer to them. That kind of kept that daylight look on their faces while filling in the rest of the scene with color.
Because we're not shooting like a Blade Runner style scene where the RGB is like blowing everything out of the water. You're still getting some of that white light in there.
Yep.
Okay, so before we move on, let's go ahead and let's dive into the lighting plot here. So this is that third and final scene. Walk us through the actual setup and what you used.
Yeah. So as you can kind of see, starting from the very far back, we have another table lamp kind of giving general fill and ambiance into the background of our scene. From there, we have some more string lights that are kind of adding more ambiance and acting as kind of nice little bits of bokeh for our tight close-ups. From there, we have our quasar double rainbow 2-foot at 5,000 Kelvin right on top of our subjects, again kind of filling in their skin tones, keeping things looking natural. Also right behind them we have the neon sign practical, and then we have the two 1x1s with 4x4 silks in front of them. On the 1x1 hard we had the DOP choice softbox, and then the other 1x1 we had just going through the silk, and that kind of brought in all of the color we were looking to add throughout the scene.
So one of the things I'm seeing here that I think is interesting is that you have the camera set to 3200 Kelvin in terms of your white balance. The overhead quasar is set to 5000. The holiday lights in the background are probably close to that 3200, maybe even like 2700 Kelvin. Why set the white balance warm if the overhead is cool?
Yeah. So looking at our references, all the tones throughout that felt a lot cooler. So to kind of capture that look in camera a little bit, we had to shoot at a lower white balance to kind of help the color grade and keep things looking cooler.
And this is one of those things where having your Kelvin table memorized, right? And not to the 10, but like memorizing the overall look and feel of your Kelvin table helps, because on the one hand, if we mess up our white balance, we're really going to screw up skin tones. And if we screw up skin tones, we're not going to be able to recover that in a way that then allows us to also grade. But if you understand Kelvin and you understand how that works on complexion, we can use the white balance in camera to help the look, to help inform the feel as a narrative choice, instead of just relying on it being it right in the middle. One of the things that I think is important to talk about, we talked about it a little bit in some of the previous episodes, is the complexion of somebody's face is going to be directly related to how we should light them in terms of color temperature. The fairer or the more fair a person's complexion is, the white balance key that we'd be kind of playing with would be a much cooler Kelvin, right? So Caucasian folks, white folks, generally 5600 Kelvin gives us a very normal looking skin tone. The deeper the complexion goes, the warmer you want that image to be balanced to. So lighting someone with a deeper complexion closer to a 3200 Kelvin is going to make the light reflect and refract a lot better and more pleasing on a deeper complexion than a fairer complexion. And it's a little things like that when you understand your Kelvin and you understand how that works, that then can be used as a narrative tool in the same way that we use RGB, in the same way that we use warm white or cool white, and then being able to tune all of the fixtures to that as a narrative tool. Okay, so another question here. How much of your budget was given to the lighting? Sam, I'll have you go first. I'll follow up.
A majority of the budget would have gone into the lighting for this. The lights and the camera were probably the most expensive. We really were able to call in a lot of favors for this in terms of our cast and crew. But generally on sets, all of our budget is going into, or not all of it, but a large chunk of our budget is going into our lighting, because lighting always makes the image. We've kind of learned that you can shoot a really high quality image with really good lighting and a lesser camera or lesser lenses. We really like to shoot on vintage lenses, which are generally incredibly inexpensive. Like the Helios you can get on eBay for like $60. That's one of our favorite lenses to use in some of our works. And so just kind of putting a majority of our budget into lighting is pretty common.
That little Helios was used in the Batman and Dune Part 2. Like it's a very capable lens for next to nothing. But to answer your question from my perspective here, if you're an owner operator, right, you own your own gear. If you're starting a production company or an agency and you're doing all of your own work, the single most important thing you can invest in is lighting and lighting modifiers. I would take a very cheap camera and have a very good lighting package, more so than I would take a very expensive camera and no lights. The best way I can describe this is like a guitar and an amplifier. You can have the best guitar in the world, but if your amp stinks, you're not going to be able to hear what that guitar is able to do. If you have a cheap guitar, but you're able to pull an incredible sound out of that, that's a much more desirable way to go. The same is true here. So in terms of like investing, lighting is first. I would say lensing is probably second, and then third would be camera. In 2024, all cameras are great. You'd be hard pressed to find a camera that is in current production that's unable to make a good image. I would argue they all are, given the right lighting. Each camera is going to have different limitations, and if we can understand that and work around that, again, having the brightest, most accurate lights we can, we're going to be able to do anything that we want. Okay, we're rapidly wrapping out of time, but Sam, any final notes, anything that you want to leave the people with, anything you want to plug in regards to this?
I mean, I want to thank everyone who was able to help us out with this production. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to do what we did. Working closely with friends is always great. It makes set more fun. It makes the day more enjoyable and go by quicker. And just really testing things out. Pre-pro. I love to preach that. Ever since that finally clicked with me, I feel like I've been able to create images more in tune to what I've imagined, doing test shoots, previs in programs like Cinetracer or Storyboarder. Just really planning things out beforehand.
I love it. Well, Sam, thank you so much for your time. Thanks again to Light Panels for putting this on. If you want to engage with Sam or I, please feel free to follow us on Instagram, on YouTube. Again, make sure you subscribe to Light Panels YouTube channel so you can catch up on all the past episodes. Make sure there's a link in the chat right now. Make sure you register for episode 3 of our Inspired By series. Appreciate all your time. Thank you all so much. And I look forward to see you all in the next episode.